Hello, everyone. Oops, now I'm unmuted. There we go. And I think you're muted still, Bobby.
Am I?
There you go. Welcome, everyone out there in Facebook land and wherever else we're broadcasting to. Dr. Fred Blum, Bobby Cobb to my video right, that way. And apologize for being a few minutes late this afternoon. We had some technical difficulties we had to sort out, but we're here now. And the topic for today's Presence Posse is presence and anxiety. Seems like there's a lot of various reasons why people might be experiencing anxiety in the world today. What do you think about that, Bobby?
Yeah, and it seems like the certain parts of the media are liking the anxiety and fomenting to a degree the anxiety that if you're looking for something to be anxious about, sources
Where it's like a smorgasbord, isn't it? Like, take your pick.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I see something similar in that regard, that anxiety seems to be something that is almost expected of us right now. Like we should be constantly afraid, constantly worried. And there's obviously the world events that we can pin that on, but then we have all our own lives and the stuff that appear to make us anxious just in the day-to-day world, prior to pandemics and all that other stuff. So what is your, anything you'd like to just say to sort of open this up?
Well, yeah, two things. One is, as you were saying that, it occurred to me that a source for some folks of anxiety is the fact that other folks are not anxious enough. And, you can listen to interviews and people on talking, particularly if, healthcare and that comes up, because we're so divided on that currently, that there are very many people who are anxious. And if you ask them to identify, what is it that you're anxious about? I might say, I'm anxious because Fred seems so calm. And it bugs me that Fred's just going around as if nothing's going on. Yeah. And that's causing me anxiety. And, you see that with family dynamics and in some case couples. There definitely is a lot of stuff to be anxious about. I'm excited about this topic for a weird way. I'm working through an active cancer diagnosis. Right now I have a procedure coming up on February the 4th. And, life still for me right now is going on great and things are fine. And people are always asking me, how are you doing? And I actually feel, if I just stop and close my eyes and check in, I feel better than I have in a long time because I'm doing so much extra stuff. And, my attention and my intention has gone inward to being calm and being in an optimal healing state. And things have actually disappeared when I really check in and say, how are you doing? But the things that more are pulling me out and saying you need to be worried about this event that could be happening in the future, the pull of those is a lot more dramatic than it was 10 weeks ago.
I get it. And so you hit on something really important, right? Like, what is anxiety? Now, I'm sure there's some, DSM clinical definition. But you just said something really important because it sort of fits with the, the diversion of anxiety that I would typically use, which has to do with being worried about some future event. This may be overly simplistic, but the understanding that I like to work with is that depression is usually something to do with our past, caught in some past events or circumstances that are continuing to play out today, at least in our minds. And anxiety is the same thing in reverse. It's worrying about some future event that hasn't occurred, may never occur.
Right.
but that we worry about it and make ourselves crazy about it in the present.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. And
makes
and
sense?
and when you realize, when you take the advice of the Zen master Yogi Berra,
Hmm.
one of his sayings is, people are really bad about predicting, especially when the future's involved.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we do, in a way, it's a gift and a curse that we have the ability to very rapidly analyze the worst case scenario. And if you're a proponent of, hope for the best, but plan for the worst, that's a great skill and it's a great gift. But if that's all you ever do, man, that becomes a curse really, really quickly.
And so Miriam's sharing, a simple definition of anxiety, excessive worry. Absolutely. I mean, that's
Yeah.
got to be tied to it, right? And, I'll also add that from an evolutionary standpoint, this was something, we would be scanning the horizon for threats because, I don't know what the time frame is, 50,000 years ago, whatever it is, like we live under the active threat of being eaten, of being, being killed in some violent way just by, our environment. So I don't know if we call that anxiety, right? I don't know that they walked around constantly fearing the future or if it was just sort of a vigilance
No.
that was present, right? Because it was a legitimate thing, right? There were legitimate dangers in your environment and you had to just account for them. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not anxiety to me. That's just, doing the proper,
Awareness.
what was it? Awareness,
Awareness. I
right?
mean, yeah,
Paying attention.
contextual.
Some pterodactyl is going to come and pluck you out of the, So, but anxiety is really an imagined future. Excessive worry, as Miriam says, about an imagined future that hasn't yet occurred,
Right.
right? Healthy
Yeah.
attention versus overactive attention, So
Yeah. So,
that's a good
so is
distinction,
it
actually. Yeah.
is it too much to say that when we are fully present, fully in the moment, is it too much to say that anxiety cannot exist?
Right.
And I'm asking that. I'm just kind of rolling that around in my head. I'm curious as to what you think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate question, first of all, and that's been my experience, because now let's get into really what like the way that we look at this, because I know you and I have a similar viewpoint, at least I think
Right.
so,
Yeah.
which is, anxiety to me is really a game that the ego plays. So if we're looking at like the fundamental distinction, at least that I like to make between the ego and the true self, the ego is the only part of ourselves that would project into some future. Again, if anxiety is worrying about an imagined future, then if you're in the present, that there's just nothing there to be anxious about. And if you're in the present and some danger is immediately apparent, that's not anxiety now. That's a legitimate, you may have some kind of fight or flight response, but it's a legitimate response to what's actually happening now in reality, as opposed to some feared future that hasn't occurred.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about a telephone call that I had yesterday, and I was anxious during that telephone call. And I realized later that we were having two separate phone calls. I made a post on Facebook that really inspired a friend of mine to have this whole thought explosion that had nothing to do with my post, but it
Okay.
was the catalyst that got her really thinking about. And so she called me and she was like really wanting to talk about it. And for the first half of the conversation, I was thinking that she was being critical of the post that I had made, and in my mind I was imagining that I had in some way offended her, because what I wrote on the post could be also applied to this woman generally, not specifically. So I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, I'm wondering if she's like thinking of this post. So I'm traveling back to what she may have read in, a moment ago, and I'm projecting out to the future that she believes that I'm saying these things about her. And all of this, like in the first half of this, it was like a 20-minute call. Like, so for the first 10 minutes, I'm like, am I safe? And is she thinking I'm saying something that I'm not? And I'm letting her speak, and I'm just listening to what she's saying and to the voice that's going on inside my head. And then she said something where I just immediately go, oh, this isn't about me or what I wrote at all. This is about an insight that she had because of what she read that she's excited about. And in that moment, it was like I went from, anxiety on scale up to 100, I'm at 85. And with that realization, all of a sudden, I'm like down to a 15, and I'm totally relaxed. And nothing had changed other than my perspective and that little bit of insight that I finally got. And all of a sudden, the inner critic that's like, you should be careful about what you write because you can offend people, and all of that nonsense just melted away. But there was anxiety in the moment. However, the anxiety in the moment was taking place because mentally I wasn't present. I was digging out into the past about what I had written and worried about in the future of what she may
You
say.
just said
And
something really
so it was
interesting.
just static.
You just said something really interesting. Well, you said a few things that were interesting, but one caught my attention. Anxiety in the moment. So, in other words, in the present moment, you can have an experience of anxiety, which may be tied in your thinking to some future. But to me, the secret here is to just attend to your experience in this moment.
Right.
So in this moment, you have, look at that, you're already being quoted. Um, um,
Instant classic.
yeah, you're right. So, you know, the answer for me so often is, what is my experience, or what is your experience right now in this moment? And we don't even, the word anxiety is a label.
Right.
Experience itself doesn't like label itself anxiety.
Right.
So in that moment, I'm feeling a tightness in my chest. I notice my breathing is a little fast. I notice that I'm having thoughts that are saying, what if this, what if that? And any other things that you might tie to that, heartbeat, pit of the stomach, whatever it may be. But then, and this is a trick. This is what it does take practice to be able to really slow down enough with your attention to just drop back into, what is my experience right here, right now? And you back to the question that you asked earlier. In that moment, you may be able to notice all of this stuff that's happening, but I'm not even sure that I would call it anxiety anymore.
Right.
Now you're just being with what's happening. And I believe, the more you settle into your experience as it's unfolding,
That is
the
beautiful.
less the future begins to pull us, the less the worry and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you check it in, and you go, oh, you know what? Right now, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So how much more complicated than that does it need to be?
Not at all. And it's the layers of complication that we add onto it. And it's they're like in the Tao Te Ching, they talk a lot about the way that can be named
Right.
is not the eternal way. And it's an invitation to like give up the need to judge and to label and to categorize and create all of these hierarchies. And in the absence of those things, a lot of that just automatically washes it away.
Mm-hmm.
And to the best of my ability, because we do this every week, this is the first one I've been on in 6 or 7 weeks,
Yeah.
because I just had a lot of other stuff going on, and I've been, I've been exploring all of these feelings, and I've been exploring who is it that is anxious, and what
Mm.
is the one who is anxious about. And those have been wonderful, interesting threads to pull, and they've led to all kinds of cool stuff. But one of the real coolest is just that anxiety can just be a trigger to pull yourself back into the self-inquiry work that you do and I do, and lots
Yeah.
of other.
Well, I mean, what if we used any experience that we were having? Now, if it's like overwhelming, then you need some tools to kind of tone
Right.
it down a little bit, I mean, and those could be as simple as learning to breathe, I mean, I'll share one here because maybe, this is something that,
I have one after that. The
yeah,
reason
please.
that I'm laughing, so please go ahead, and
Yeah.
I'll add on.
I mean, one of the simplest, when it comes to things like anxiety, um, one of the simplest tools is simply from a breath perspective is to make your exhale a little longer than your inhale. So if you breathe in for 4 count, maybe breathe out for 6. And this is, it literally changes what's called vagal tone, the vagus nerve, which
Yeah.
is tied to this fight or flight response, etc. It's what the Navy SEALs use, in much more intense situations than you or I probably find ourselves in most of the time. And I wanted to share that because it's sometimes what I'm about to say about being with your experience isn't so easy if you're in the habit of being overwhelmed by your experience a lot, you
Ooh,
know?
say that again. Could you?
Sure. It's really a habit, right? It's like we get in the habit of not being able to be present with our experience because it always seems overwhelming, you know? And so we just kind of go on like this automatic pilot, this get on the crazy train, right? I would even suggest that that's an ego game in and of itself, right? Your ego says to you, you can't slow down, you can't take a breath, you can't be present. It's too intense. There's too much going on, you know? So I would just invite anyone who maybe has that experience to question it for a moment
Yeah.
and really learn it. Yes, these things take practice, which means, okay, I'm really nervous. I'm going to do 1 2 second inhale and 4 second exhale. And then I'm shocked that I'm still feeling anxious after that. So it takes some practice. And ideally, you practice not when you're in crisis.
Yeah.
This is the old, how does it work? You got a hole in your roof and nobody wants to go up and fix the hole in the roof when it's sunny outside because you don't have a problem. And then when it's raining outside, who wants to climb on the roof and fix the
Right.
roof? So you end up with buckets everywhere. So yeah, it really does pay to practice, even if it's just the simple technique that I just shared. I think you said you had one you were going to share.
Yeah, well, kind of a story about that, because
Mhm.
I teach breathing as
Mhm.
a part of what I do, because it is the easiest thing for us to either turn over to the autonomic system or take conscious
Right.
control over. And when I start working with a new client, working with our breath is one of the first things that I get them to do, and I get them to interrupt their pattern day by setting a little timer to interrupt,
Mhm.
and just to check in. And that is, to me, the fixing of the roof on the sunny day,
Right.
because if you only pull these skills out when you're feeling overwhelmed, you may not even be able to get access to them. So that's my story. So
Mhm.
uh, my my cancer, the diagnosis part of it, the discovery part of it, started when I had urine in my blood. I knew from had that in the past, that was one of the warning
I
signs.
think you mean
I go
that
to a
the
little
opposite
doc in the
way.
box because I can get in there right away. Don't have to wait for an appointment. I go in
Mhm.
and have my blood pressure taken, and it is like 194 over 115 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
And I see that, and normally my blood pressure is really good. I meditate, I do yoga. I'm normally like 117 to 75 is
Mhm.
the norm, and I don't even take it regularly because it's just always good. So I see that, and I'm like, "Geez, do you need to call an ambulance?" And she's like, "No, no, no." She
Mhm.
goes, "Trust me, we see this all the time with folks like you. It's completely natural." So that was okay, and that was enough to get me not thinking about it. A week later, I go to the doctor and it's still there, and they start talking about this is just white coat syndrome. You're nervous because you're in the doctor's office. But then I finally went out and got a blood pressure monitor, and I started doing it, and it was staying up. It was not as bad
Really?
as that, but it was high, like to the level of like dangerously high. Oh, top number was
Mhm.
over 140, bottom number was over 100. Those are not healthy numbers. And I
Mhm.
was really struggling. Should I like talk about to somebody about blood pressure meds, which I've never been on, and I'm nervous about, skeptical of. I don't really want to be on it. And one day my girlfriend says to me, "Can you control it with your breath?" And I knew that I could because I've done that before. Yeah. And and so I started doing it, and I had the monitor on. I took it. It was high. I did 30 seconds of breathing exercises, took it again. It was down. I did it again. It was down. I did it again. It was down. And I got it to where, it was like in the 120 and 80 numbers. So at least like more toward normal. And since then, that was about 10 days ago. And I had a lot of mental static going on and a lot of fear going on. And she was making me nervous because she's a medical professional pharmacist. And,
Mhm.
she knows that these numbers are really, really bad. And she typically sees them in an ER. So, not a good thing. She was getting nervous, which was contributing to my nervous. But
Right.
then all of a sudden, just that thing, which I knew I could do, as soon as she said it, I'm like, well, yeah, duh. I've played around with that enough to know that I can do it. I've never done it in live fire like I'm doing it now, but it worked well. And since then, two things have happened. One is I haven't given a thought about my blood pressure. I still am taking it regularly, but more often than not, it's there. And I just wonder how much of the anxiety that I was experiencing was making my blood pressure go up. And then with the realization that you're in control of this and you have these skills, how much of it was just the aha moment to go, oh, yeah, that's right. I am in control of this. And that just melting the anxiety away. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and one of the things that I take from that is, and I want to really emphasize this, and again, back to why you want to practice some kind of skill, whether it's the simple breathing technique that I shared or any number of others, because when then, in your case, where you encounter this stressful event, and it seems to be tied to elevating your blood pressure or anxiety. Um, when you actively choose in that moment to use your breath to calm it down, you are literally changing your neurology. You know, you're creating neural pathways that will allow you to do this more and more efficiently in the future. Because that's what the brain does. It says, oh, apparently we want to do this. Apparently, when we're angry, we're going to breathe, and that's going to lower our anxiety or our blood pressure. Okay, good. Let's set up some pathways to make that a little easier in the future. And the more you practice, the better you get. So you want to have the tools so that then when you have anxiety or blood pressure or something, it actually becomes an opportunity.
Yeah.
Now if I can do this work now,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
actually going to build even stronger resilience for the future.
Yeah.
So, it's an opportunity then. It's not just a crisis. Please, God, get me through this, and
Yeah. And that reminds me, I was one of the certifications of hypnotherapy that I got along the way. I don't remember which one it was. I had to do 50 cases of live and follow up with people to see what the results were. And I had to document what protocols I used and all of that kind of stuff with a mentor. And I did quite a few fear of flying on planes because I was traveling on business a lot then. And I did a bunch where I did in-flight fear of flying phobia cures using various hypnotic and NLP protocols. And they all worked. As I followed up on them, I was like 100% with those people. And with other things that I was doing in other places, you know, I was 2/3 or 3/4, some of them were 80% or whatever. But with this one thing, I was 100%. And I was kind of like, man, what's going on there? And I don't know if somebody else said it or it just occurred to me one day, was with those people, the doubt was completely removed, because when I brought them up out of trance, they're on a plane and they're feeling okay. And they're like, this isn't bad. Wow, this is a completely different experience. So there was no theory involved. So like you're, practicing it while the sun is shining and the hole in the roof doesn't bother you, then gives you that muscle memory and that skill set and those neural pathways and everything else. And doing it in the moment, like the value for me of getting amped up enough and having a girlfriend that was seriously considering calling 911. And then that flash of insight, which it's curious too, as anxiety increases, I think our access to resources decreases. There's an inverse relationship there, that when you're calm and you have a clear mind, it's like, well, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. I've got lots of options. I could eat differently. I can meditate or medicate or go for a walk, or, there's lots of ways that I can deal with this. But like in the moment, right before she said, can you control this with your breathing? She was seriously thinking about calling 911. And I was seriously thinking about saying, go ahead and call now. And then that just disappeared.
Right. Like, where did it go?
It just melted away.
And this is the beauty of just learning to slow down.
Yeah.
To keep it like in this realm of really self-discovery or self-inquiry. You said earlier, who is it that's having the anxiety? That's one direction we can go, right? Now that, again, you have to practice to be able to do something like that effectively. But learning to slow down just enough to notice I'm having this experience, because what happens is, again, if we look at this ego versus true self distinction, the ego identifies with the experience. The ego says, I am anxious, and then it begins to get caught up in the drama of that anxiety. If we can slow down enough to see that I am experiencing anxiety. It's not me. I think this is really a big place where people get caught, is they think that this is me, right? It's not you.
Right.
It's just an experience. It's something that's happening. And the more you can, in simple terms, we call this witnessing, just the ability to step back from something like that and watch it unfold instead of becoming dragged into it can be enormously helpful. And then again, we have those resources, that you spoke about earlier that are available to us that seem like they're not available when we're caught in the drama.
It seemed like, yeah. And that's a very sweet distinction, because they are there. I mean, my ability to have used my breath in that moment was equally as present the moment before I realized as it was the moment after I realized it. The only thing that had changed was my perspective. I was no longer, I had made that shift to, this is something that's happening and it requires a response, and I know what the response is and do the response, versus being like swept up in the the storm and just feeling like I'm in the vortex and there's nothing I can
So
do.
I was going to just ask you if you could describe that experience. Like I think the contrast might be useful, um, where you were in the experience of anxiety, and how is that versus when you made that shift.
Well, I actually heard something like a few days later that I thought elegantly described sort of what I was experiencing. So it felt like the mental static felt like a storm. It felt like a tornado, and at the peak of it, when I'm looking at my friend who's looking at me, and I can see she wears her emotions on her face.
Mm,
I can see that she is like really, really worried in a way that she's thinking he's about to stroke out and I need to call the doctor and the ambulance. So that was increasing the static of it all. And the description that I heard was like when we medicate to get out of thinking, if we're doing any habitual watching porn, doing drugs, drinking, even like people who work out excessively just
right.
because it keeps their mind off of their issues, there's this flow that's going on, and we are electing to like hunker down and bury ourselves. And like in my mind, that storm represented itself like a tornado. And I imagined, I've never been in a tornado, but I imagine the people down in their cellar hunkered down and the wind spinning over them. And so they're protected from the storm, but they're not watching the storm, they're hiding. And that seems to me like kind of the way I was choosing to deal with it in the moment, that it was like hunkering down. Whereas what you're describing, being the witness and just being awake being that is noticing these temporary things rise and fall within our awareness, then it seems more like the hurricane hunter type planes that fly above the storm and take the pictures that we see of the eye of the storm and the big clouds that they superimpose. It's like you're outside of the storm and
Right.
just witness to it, and in that you can see the beauty and the majesty of it, where if you're in it or if you're hunkered down trying to get below this flow of thought, then you're not appreciating any of it. You're just in the
That's really interesting. And I know Miriam wants to share something in a moment, but I just wanted to say, comment on that last thing you said. Like, can you imagine, and I'm asking this for our audience as well, that it's possible to witness something like anxiety from a position of like being almost awestruck by it, you know? Like, wow, look what's going on here. But in order to do that, you've got to be disconnected. You've got to be unidentified with it.
right.
But I think that's fascinating, the opportunity to just witness any experience from that perspective of fascination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And could you talk if there is a distinction for you? Um, like I think many people, like if you start talking meditation, people will sometimes say, so what am I supposed to do? Just sit with my legs crossed all day?
Mhm.
And that's kind of where our mind goes. And so when you said disconnecting, particularly as you're asking the audience to do the little bit of self exploration, disconnecting to some people seems to be processed in a way where they think it means I don't care
Yeah, I
and
actually
just
hesitated to
nothing
use that
affects
word.
me, and so I'm
Yeah,
just going to be a zombie.
yeah.
And that's not it at all. But how would you, like, if you were coaching me and I was to say, so what, Fred, I'm supposed to just disconnect and not care? I'm not supposed to care that children are starving in Africa?
Maybe a
And it's
better
not that
word.
at all, but like,
Yeah, maybe a better word is unhook. You know, like if you can unhook from the anxiety, because disconnect does have other potential implications.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, if like you're worried because there are children starving, by all means, do something to feed those children. But at the same time, I don't think your worry is helping the children. So can we help the children and still stay in our own place of peace and clarity?
And if you are going to help the children, where's the best place to be?
Right, exactly.
In a calm, centered, grounded, and aligned
Exactly.
state
Right.
where you do have good access to all of your resources.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think Miriam's got something that she would like to add. So let's hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you, gentlemen. And actually, I was enjoying just the two of you talking, and was not planning to come along for the ride. But then I started thinking about some of the things you were saying, and I have an extra dimension, if you don't mind, and then I can maybe leave again.
Our secret goal was to be provocative enough that you would feel the need to join us. So we're both happy, and our egos are happy that we accomplished that goal. We hooked you.
Well, thank you very much.
We can hook as well as unhook.
Excellent. I work, as you know, a lot with traumatized people, or people who have been through some sort of trauma and need to work through it or with it or whatever. And earlier you were speaking about being in a state of overwhelm, and describing a situation of anxiety. And I was thinking, what I notice a lot of times is when anxiety, fear of any kind shows up, that people who have experienced trauma will believe when they feel fear, there is something to be afraid of. So when the feeling of fear shows up, it's telling them they're in danger. That's how they believe, that's what they believe to be the case. Instead of, I feel fear and I'm fine. The fear is connected to a memory or a trigger or something I just felt or thought of, whatever. It is not an indication of any real danger to me at this moment. So a lot of times when I work with people who have gone into that fear, stress, fight, freeze, flight, whatever, fixation, I will get them to describe things in the room and describe it. A lot of times people use tell me what's going on in your body. But being that frightened, being that terrified, there's no necessary, there isn't necessarily a connection with the body.
Right.
So even breathing, like the two of you were mentioning breathing is not necessarily helpful because it doesn't tell them where their body is, and it doesn't tell them where they're safe, that they're safe.
Well, hence the practice before you get to that point part.
So it's yes, but in the moment when there's overwhelming fear, it's like, now I feel where I am, because the breath is kind of like this loose thing. But if I can tell myself, this is where I am, I will often get people to slide their hands from their waist along their sides, along their hips, and down to just above their knees, and just really, really slowly define for themselves where their body is, so that they're not lost in the fear and disappearing into the feelings, because they don't even necessarily have contact with their thoughts even. They just are overwhelmed by the feeling of anxiety and the fear and the conviction that there is something to be afraid of, that they are in danger. And when I tell them, how many lamps are in the room? What else? How many pictures do you see on the wall? It's necessary for them to focus on what is actually in their purview. And then after a while, it becomes clear to them that there is no danger. They are still sitting in the same chair, in the same room, speaking to me. And the only difference is they feel fear, but they are not in danger. And that is a kind of practice that is very difficult to do alone. and not in the moment. So I just wanted to bring that up. That is a very excellent mindful practice to be done with someone, with a therapist, or with, so who can help you if you feel overwhelmed by fear and anxiety, to not believe that the fear is telling you that you're in danger. The fear is just an indication of an inner situation that you may need to become conscious of.
So I would actually, what you described from like a hypnotherapy standpoint would be considered orienting touch. You know, you're getting them to feel there are things that they're familiar with, and that's orienting them back into the moment and into the room and into their experience out of their head. We do the same things with questions when we're like, if we're regressing somebody, and I would say something like, in a moment, I'm going to count to 3. And when I count to 3, I'll snap my fingers and you will be at XYZ experiencing something. And, you know, depending, that's all contextual, obviously. But then I'll do what I said I was going to do. I count to 3, 1, 2, 3, snap my fingers. And then I immediately say, not immediately, but like within a couple of seconds, say, what are you noticing? What are you aware of? And start very broad, general, so they can just fill in whatever. If they're not getting anything, what do you see? What are you wearing? Who are you with? Are you alone or with others? And it's, I'm sensing, like your touch, what that does is bring them into this moment, allows them potentially to experience that fear, but the questions are letting them know you're still here. You're still in the hypnotherapy room. You're still experiencing this. You can still hear my voice and all of that. It's like a cool little device to bring one back to present and hopefully, ideally, shift them to that witness awareness that Fred was talking about earlier. Cool stuff.
Yeah, very. I'm just, we've gotten a question. What about the ability to disconnect? The ability to disconnection trauma gives. Most people would be very good at not relating to their body in danger.
I'm going to need a little clarification.
I was going to say, does everybody understand that question? Because I'm not sure I do.
I don't, but Astrid, if you're willing to maybe ask it again or add a little bit of information, I'd love to.
Yeah, Astrid, that would be really great if you could clarify. What about the ability to disconnection trauma gives?
I think, well, there's a typo in there somewhere. So
yeah. Well, that's kind of my point. The way I understand it, and then Astrid, you just sort of correct me if I've misunderstood. It was kind of what I was referring to earlier about people who don't relate to their body in danger. That's basically what happens. We don't. I mean, if somebody's shooting at me, I'm not going to be standing there going, oh, do I feel pain in my left shoulder? Or do I, I'm running, or whatever I'm doing to get away from so I disconnect there's a disconnect between my thoughts and my body so that I can save myself. And that will show up in people who are not in danger, but think they're in danger. And that can be very helpful. I mean, if I'm getting a beating from somebody, it's not, a bad thing if I disconnect from the pain of it in order to get through it. But I have to come back to my body. When the beating stops, I'm not being beaten anymore. And now I'm fine. And now I need to connect with my body to know with certainty that I'm fine. Because if I just tell myself I'm fine, then it's words, it's thoughts. You can't touch a thought, but you can touch your body.
And those thoughts typically can penetrate all the way down to the level of the nervous system where these things are occurring. Everyone's had difficult, traumatic, highly stressful experiences in our life. And we have a nervous system that has this fight or flight emergency response for a reason. The challenge becomes when we don't resolve that energy, we can't process it effectively. And so it stays locked in our system, in some cases, years or decades after whatever the original event was. So we may be responding in many cases to stresses that happened when we were kids. And that reaction is locked in our physiology. And again, the miracle here is that we really can unwire those responses. And it's very much the things we're talking about here: being present, in touch with your body, being able to see what's happening in your environment, breathing, are really good tools. And then as we progress on this path, if we're really looking to go beyond just management, which is one level, I'm just managing my anxiety, to a point where we actually might, maybe the word would be transcendent, where we really begin to see, getting a glimpse of who we really are, where we begin to see more and more that, as Wayne Dyer said, we are a physical being, a spiritual being having a physical experience. We can begin to observe these things unfolding with less and less need to participate in them. Again, these things take practice. They take attention. Sometimes they take help, which is why we're here. But to get to that place where every mood that goes through me doesn't have to drag me in some direction, that I have become, more and more clear about who I am versus the moods or the experiences that pass through me. That's where I attempt in my work with people, because I don't want to do, first aid work all day long with people, just constantly talking people off the ledge. I prefer to see people use whatever is happening in their life as an opportunity to move beyond that, to transcend that experience. And that, it takes some time.
There's this thing about, I'm having a thought about something. Instead of believing the thought to be true, it's a thought about something. It doesn't decide what the something is. If I believe my thought to define reality, then I might be in trouble. Even some judgment about something somebody did or said or whatever, the guy's a jerk. And then I notice, why am I like, I'm the one doing that. I'm the one who's deciding, who's interpreting the situation, making it into something, deciding who the other person is, and then acting on that if I do that. Instead of, I'm uncomfortable with the situation. I feel anger. I'm judging that guy. What's going on with me?
Yeah.
What's going on with me? Because whatever the person did or said it's their thing, but what I make it into is my responsibility.
So imagine having the presence of mind to look at an experience that you would normally project onto another person, like anger, and to really be able to come back in. And what's going on with me, that's like the level of, okay, I'm going to think about it, I'm going to wonder about it, and that's perfectly valid. And then another level is just to be present with my own anger, and just be present with whatever I'm experiencing. It's like there's Miriam's making a face. I know that face.
This is actually a really good example of what I'm hearing. Your understanding of what I said, and it's not resonating with what I meant.
All right, let's get clear about
so I'm just noticing what's going on in my body, and it's probably showing up on my face, is there's a non-resonance, resonance with, but that's a thing. It's like people will assume that when I say something, this is an example, that I'm thinking. That's at the level of thinking. And for me, it isn't. It's, I feel it, and then it becomes, it's what we call mentalization. It's what is my body telling me? So what's going on with me is not a mental thing for me. It's, what do I feel? It's me feeling something, and then just taking responsibility, feeling it, owning it, being with it, and then learning something, noticing something that I can put into words afterwards. So I just wanted to make that clarification, that asking myself what's going on with me isn't necessarily at a thought level. It's more of a being level.
Yeah, which is what I was actually pointing to. Exactly.
Okay.
being present with whatever's happening, you know. But I guess my original idea about it was just imagine a world where we all take responsibility for our own experience. You know, next week, I believe the topic is presence and divisiveness. And it seems like so much of the divisiveness that we experience is because we don't take responsibility for our own experience. Someone says this, and I immediately get reactive to it. And it just becomes like, you know, we're just throwing rocks at each other now.
And nobody's admitting what's really going on with them. The focus becomes on the other person and what they're doing. And it's really interesting, I think, what I'm feeling seems to be about the other person when it's actually all me.
Isn't that so often the case?
You mean with me, Bobby?
No. I think that very many folks that are listening to this can identify both with the fact that they do that. You know, the story that I was telling earlier about my telephone conversation, that was all me projecting stuff onto her that she wasn't saying. And it was me reacting to the stuff. So asking the question, is it true? That's a great question to ask, because in actuality, none of that was true. And I think another thing that people do is they identify it at the level of you, just you know, keep it rhyming with true, that they think this is who I am. And you know, they might say, for example, you know, I'm just naturally a procrastinator.
Yeah.
But they can think of plenty of things that they don't procrastinate all about. I had that conversation with a guy who is a recovering alcoholic, and he said he's a procrastinator. I said, what don't you procrastinate about? And he goes, well, previously it was drinking. I was never late for a drink. And you know, like, it's almost like there's another layer of that we can watch the nervousness or the anxiety or whatever arise, and from the point of view of the witness, and just go, oh wow, anxiety is arising in me, what's going on there? And that's kind of one level. And then the next one would be, I am anxious, or I have anxiety disorder, or, you know, I'm just a nervous person, to really have it as one of the essential building blocks of who you are.
Yeah, then it becomes part of your identity. Yeah. This is common, right? We go to a doctor and they give us a diagnosis, you know, and we become this, they project this idea onto us, and we just take it on. Okay, I'm now an anxious person. I have a disorder, whatever it may be. And I can't really emphasize or speak to how beautiful it is to just be able to watch it, to be able to be with your experience, which I've probably said a dozen times here, is such a gift, and it's available to all of us.
Yeah.
We have to learn to slow down. We have to learn, you know, to practice these things, literally create the neural pathways like we talked about before. But this is available to us, and it's closer than I think maybe some people realize. You know, it's not a profitable industry compared to anxiety, right? But it's,
I think when it comes to diagnosis or the characterization of some sort of identity, I'm a nervous person, or I have this kind of disorder, I think it can be more productive to, if you're going to think of it, if you're going to label anything or think in any particular way, it's, I am in the habit of responding or reacting in a certain way to certain situations. So I'm in the habit of reacting this way, and I can change a habit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least it's not you now.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, but it can be done.
But at least you've put one layer between you and the anxiety now. So it's not, you haven't become something. You're just identifying a habit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. And I mean, there are some people who have such strong anxiety, such strong terror reactions that they actually pass out.
Yeah.
And that's difficult to deal with because they're no longer conscious and present to them in the moment. And it's also very physically painful, that situation. But then they wake, then they come to, and they can be even frightened by their response, their extreme response to an extreme fear reaction. But even that, and just so that you know, like Fred and Bobby have both said this throughout the talk, is all of this needs to be practiced, can be learned, can be practiced, can be changed. It doesn't mean it's like that and it's solved. Some people are very fortunate. Something happens and boom, they're not drinking anymore or whatever it is. But for the most part, it's like a muscle, any other muscle. You go to the gym and you have to work it out. You have to train it and get it stronger. If you have a weak muscle, it doesn't mean you're a weak person. It just means you need to work on your muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with your brain and your habitual patterns and all those patterns and pathways that are more predominant in your brain. They can be changed. And if you need help with that, any of us can help you with that.
That's a really good point, because just like I'm saying, you can build new neural pathways. It's also important to acknowledge that there are old ones, right? We said this a long time ago, that you get what you practice in life. So if you've practiced being anxious, you can become really good at being anxious. And those neural pathways are laid down and they're available anytime you want them or don't want them. But so that's, again, this is why we need to practice. This is why we need to practice what we do want. And the trick with anxiety, of course, is that since, the very nature of it is that everything seems like an emergency, it becomes like the self-perpetuating loop where it becomes difficult to slow down and say, okay, I'm going to, but you need to bring a little bit of something in, a little self-discipline, a little something that says, I'm going to interrupt this loop.
Yeah. Pattern interrupt.
I'm willing to be open to the possibility that this might not be what I think it is.
Yeah.
Like sometimes just starting with, I'm willing to be open to the possibility that there's something else than my habitual response. And sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
The conditioning is powerful, and it's been going on since we were about 2. So interrupting, I remember you saying on one of these, Fred, that it's simple, but that doesn't make it easy.
Right. Exactly.
And, it's plain to see once you understand it. It's kind of one of those duh things like I had, where, and why didn't I realize it? I don't know, because the cacophony of my inner dialogue was going on so loudly, I literally could not hear myself think. I couldn't hear the whispers of wisdom until I could. And then when I did, everything changed.
And the beauty of acknowledging it is, again, the more we acknowledge, oh, there was a moment when I could hear it, we reinforce that, we remind ourselves that it's always there. And sometimes we just have to, look for a moment. And I keep saying, slow down just enough to see something other than, like Miriam says, am I willing to see another possibility other than the one? You
actually bring up a really good point there, Fred, about, like, Bobby, if I can borrow your situation.
Sure.
There's the choice between focusing on the whole time that you didn't notice or the time that you did notice, right? And it's a matter of, because a lot of people will go to, oh, I'm so bad at this, it's never going to work, and because they're focusing on what they didn't do and not noticing that, but you actually did notice at the end, you figured it out and you got out of it. That's where the attention goes. It's not what I can't do, it's what I can and what I did.
Yeah.
Because again, making that into an identity. Oh, I'm an idiot. Oh, whatever. That's not helpful at all. That's not taking you away from being present.
Yeah.
It's taking you into, again, it's taking you into a past pain. And that's not helpful.
This is what the ego does, though, right? It looks to reinforce its identity through whatever is happening. It doesn't have to be a happy experience,
Through
It'll take
any
any
means
identity.
necessary.
Right, right. I think that's really interesting, actually, that the ego itself will take any identity, not necessarily just the ones that are the healthiest. Anything that reinforces my separate thingness is okay with me. So I'll be an anxious person just as quickly as I'll be a happy person. It doesn't matter. We have to be careful of those labels and how we allow ourselves to be pulled into them. And I'm seeing that not only have we crossed over the top of the hour, we added a few minutes for our technical snafus in the beginning, but we're now even at an hour of this broadcast itself. So somehow we always start never knowing what we're going to say, and we managed to pull up an hour. So maybe we could take a moment and just if anybody has any last words or anything that any upcoming events or something you'd like to share with the group, I'd love to hear from you guys. Miriam, what have you got going on?
Well, I'm actually just here as an extra today. But I mentioned the last time I was in a Presence Posse talk that I'm offering a new package, and I still haven't decided on a name for it yet. I'm combining 3 different techniques to help the nervous system calm down and be present. So supporting people in learning to be rather than react. And it'll be a package that runs 20 days. And I will put some information in the Presence Posse group and also on my own profile for those of you who are interested. And if anybody has a suggestion for a name, you're more than welcome to write in the comments. I'm very happy to consider all possibilities.
Awesome.
And thanks you guys for letting me jump in today. I really appreciate it.
Always a
Great
pleasure.
listening to you guys.
And it was part of the master plan, as we said.
That's right. We allowed her in, Bobby. Just keep telling me. Bobby, what about you?
Well, I'm building on, I released a program last year called Spring into Mindfulness. It's 21 days of just little short videos that explore a lot of the things that we have been talking about today, little pattern interrupts and tools and aids to get you more in the moment and more in control of your human experience. And it really, one of the things it's designed to do is so that we can become greater architects of our constructed experience that we're having in the human experience. And that's available in my group on Facebook. It's called Our Mindful Life. You can go through that. It's free. And I am going to be offering a enhanced version of that that's going to have a live component. So, if you're going through the 21 Days to Mindfulness, the free program, you'll get information on the rest of it. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now.
Awesome. Well, as for me, we in just about 3 weeks or so from now, I will be relaunching my program called the Freedom Course. And this will be the 4th time we're doing this now. And I'm just really, really thrilled and humbled by some of the experiences, the way people have been describing what they get out of that. And the Freedom Course is about this thing we call self-inquiry, where we are looking at the different ways in which we use our different experiences to define ourselves and to begin to take those apart in such a way that we're left with just the truth of who we are, what I like to call true self or true nature. The course is 10 weeks long. Each module is a different aspect of that. It's very experiential, very it's not concepts or theories. I think we all have enough of those. I try and make it as directly experiential as possible for people. So that's coming up next month. I think we begin on the 10th, and spots are filling, but we do have a few spots left. And I've actually lowered the cost on that considerably from last time because I wanted to make it available to people. So it's pretty affordable for those if you'd like to jump in and just reach out to me. My Facebook group is called Being Well, Being period well period. If you'd like to reach out to me there or through my regular Facebook page, I'd love to chat with you. And I guess that's everyone.
That is.
Well,
as we said, the next week we're going to be talking about presence and divisiveness, and how embracing presence and staying present can help alleviate some of the divisiveness that we have right now. We broadcast at the same time every Monday. We're pretty proud of the fact that we've been going about 7 months and we've only missed one Monday, and that was due to technical difficulties, which we have every week. But we overcome them every week except one. So if you've enjoyed this, you can like our Presence Posse page, and we have a Presence Posse group as well, where people talk about these matters and just engage. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you guys for making times in your days and your nights.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.